Darnell Foster was a passionate and talented black artist, working tirelessly from a small, modest studio in his cramped apartment. His studio was cluttered with canvases, each one telling a different story, each one infused with deep, personal meaning. His art was a reflection of his life, his experiences, and the struggles of his community. He painted to express the complexities of race, identity, and resilience, hoping to share with the world the stories of people like him, voices that often went unheard. Despite his undeniable talent, Darnell faced an uphill battle in the art world. His work, though powerful and emotionally charged, was consistently rejected by mainstream galleries. The elite art world, steeped in tradition and elitism, deemed his paintings too raw and unrefined. His style, bold and unconventional, clashed with the polished, highbrow standards that galleries like Caldwell's upheld. Darnell knew his art mattered, but no one seemed willing to give him the recognition he deserved. Yet, he continued to paint, driven by a deep sense of purpose. His art wasn't just a career, it was his way of speaking out, his way of processing and understanding the world around him. Through his art, Darnell aimed to shed light on the unseen struggles of Black communities, the unspoken experiences of individuals who fought every day against systemic barriers. Each brushstroke was an act of defiance, a refusal to accept the status quo. But the rejection from the very galleries he sought out left him struggling, both financially and emotionally. Despite these setbacks, Darnell believed that his time would come. Introduction to Jonathan Caldwell, the gallery owner. Jonathan Caldwell was a well-known figure in the art world, the proud owner of one of the city's most prestigious galleries. Caldwell Gallery had long been the go-to space for elite artists who catered to the tastes of wealthy, high-society patrons. The gallery's carefully curated exhibits were always polished, sophisticated, and designed to appeal to the art world's old guard. Jonathan, deeply entrenched in the traditional world of art, believed that art should reflect refinement and cultural status. His gallery was reserved for artists with pedigree, those who had attended prestigious art schools and built reputations in the established art community. Anything that didn't fit these strict standards, especially politically charged artwork or work from marginalized artists, was quickly dismissed. Jonathan was oblivious to the shifts happening in the broader art world, particularly the growing demand for diverse, socially conscious art that spoke to the current moment. Jonathan's dismissive attitude toward unconventional art was well known in the art community. He viewed pieces like Darnell's as beneath the gallery's high standards, unworthy of the attention or space Caldwell Gallery could offer. In his mind, Darnell's work was simply too raw, too unpolished to appeal to the kind of collectors and patrons he catered to. His gallery was meant to be a sanctuary for sophistication, and Jonathan felt no need to change or adapt his approach, believing that the demand for elite, traditional art would never fade. Darnell's first encounter with Jonathan Caldwell. Determined to make a name for himself and find the recognition his work deserved, Darnell made the decision to approach Caldwell Gallery. He carefully selected the pieces he believed best represented his voice, his identity, and his artistic vision. With a portfolio in hand, he set out to meet Jonathan, hopeful that the gallery owner would see beyond the surface and appreciate the depth of his art. When Darnell entered Caldwell Gallery, he was immediately struck by the atmosphere, polished, sterile, and undeniably exclusive. The gallery was pristine, its walls lined with traditional, elegant works of art that spoke to a very different world than the one Darnell knew. He felt the weight of the space, the pressure to fit into a mold that had always rejected artists like him. But he pushed those feelings aside and went forward with the presentation of his work. Jonathan Caldwell greeted Darnell with the polite but distant air of someone used to rejecting artists like him. Darnell presented his portfolio, speaking passionately about the cultural significance of his work, the messages of resilience, identity, and pride that flowed through each canvas. He spoke of his experiences and the lives of those in his community, hoping that Jonathan would understand the power of his art. Jonathan, however, barely looked at the pieces. He flipped through Darnell's portfolio with disinterest, offering little more than a few curt remarks. After a few moments, Jonathan closed the portfolio and looked at Darnell with a condescending smile. "This is too raw," Jonathan said dismissively. The gallery's patrons prefer something more polished. We showcase artists with more established reputations, with works that fit a certain standard. I'm afraid your pieces just don't fit our image. Darnell's heart sank. He had poured his soul into these works, hoping that someone like Jonathan might see their significance. Instead, he was met with rejection, dismissed as unworthy of the very space he had hoped to be accepted in. Jonathan's words stung, but they also fueled Darnell's resolve. He left the gallery that day, humiliated but not defeated. The rejection only strengthened his determination. He knew that his art was important, and he would find a way to prove it. Darnell had always known that the art world was unforgiving, but now he was more committed than ever to breaking through and showing that his voice, his art, was not only valuable but necessary. He walked away from Caldwell Gallery that day with a quiet vow: he would prove Jonathan wrong. He would make a name for himself, not by fitting into the mold set by the elite art world, but by breaking it wide open. While Jonathan Caldwell remained oblivious, Darnell Foster's art began to find its true audience in smaller, progressive art circles. These were the spaces that valued cultural relevance, emotional depth, and the power of art to communicate social and political messages. Darnell's work, which addressed themes of race, identity, and the struggles of marginalized communities, resonated with people who saw the power in his art to speak to real-world issues. As the art world began to shift, the underground circles that championed Darnell's work became a vital space for his expression. His paintings, filled with vibrant colors and symbolic imagery, spoke to the everyday struggles of Black communities, but also celebrated the strength and resilience that defined them. These pieces, once dismissed by elite galleries, were now appreciated for their cultural significance and emotional weight. Darnell began to exhibit in independent galleries that were dedicated to showcasing new voices in the art world. His work caught the attention of collectors who valued art not just for its aesthetic appeal, but for its ability to make a statement. Darnell's growing recognition was based on the real-world value his art provided, a connection to the struggles and triumphs of his people, and a bold rejection of the superficial standards that had once kept him out of the mainstream. As Darnell's name spread, he found himself invited to more exhibitions, and his work began to command higher prices. Though still largely unknown in the mainstream, he had established a loyal following within these progressive art circles. He was gaining the recognition that he had always known his art deserved, but the world still had a long way to go before it would fully embrace the value of his unique perspective. Darnell's breakthrough, auction success. Darnell's breakthrough moment came when one of his most powerful works, The Unseen Story, was purchased by a prestigious auction house. The painting, a bold portrayal of African American identity and resilience, was admired for its raw, emotional power and its ability to capture the essence of the struggles faced by marginalized communities. At the auction, the piece unexpectedly fetched a record-breaking price, far exceeding the auction house's initial estimate. The sale catapulted Darnell into the spotlight. The art world, once indifferent to his work, now took notice. Critics began to praise his innovative approach to blending contemporary techniques with deeply personal, cultural storytelling. Major collectors, who had once ignored his art, now clamored to acquire pieces of his work. Galleries that had once rejected him began reaching out, eager to showcase his pieces and add his name to their rosters. Darnell, however, remained grounded. While the financial success was a welcome shift in his fortunes, he never lost sight of the deeper purpose behind his art. The money was important, but it was the message that truly mattered to him. Darnell continued to focus on his mission of using art as a vehicle for social commentary, to challenge societal norms, and to reflect the lived experiences of those whose voices were often silenced. His success was never about fame for fame's sake, it was about making a lasting impact with his work. The breakthrough at the auction was not a fluke, nor was it simply a passing trend. Darnell's art was powerful, and now the world was beginning to see that. His rise was no longer a quiet success in underground circles, it was becoming a public force, and the art world was beginning to recognize that the time for new voices had arrived. Gallery owners continued dismissal. Despite the growing buzz around Darnell's work, Jonathan Caldwell continued to dismiss his success. From his perspective, it was all just a passing fad, an overhyped moment in the art world that would eventually lose its relevance. Jonathan's refusal to accept the changing landscape of art was evident in his ongoing dismissal of Darnell's rise. While Darnell's name was now being spoken in the same breath as art world heavyweights, Jonathan continued to mock the artist's success in private, referring to it as nothing more than the latest trend. In conversations with other art world elites, Jonathan made no secret of his disdain for what he considered a flash-in-the-pan phenomenon. He would speak of Darnell's work as too simplistic or too politically charged, unable to see the deeper cultural significance that had won Darnell such recognition. But Darnell wasn't bothered by Jonathan's dismissals. In fact, he overheard some of Jonathan's mocking comments one day when he was visiting a nearby gallery for an exhibit. The words stung, but they also fueled his determination. Darnell had long known that he would face resistance, he had lived through it all his life. But now, he was more confident than ever that his success wasn't a fluke, and it wasn't a trend. His work had meaning, depth, and impact, and he wasn't going to let anyone diminish that. Darnell's rise was no longer just a quiet success, it was a testament to the power of persistence, vision, and staying true to one's purpose. He had proven to the world that there was space for art that didn't conform to traditional standards, and the art world was beginning to shift. While Jonathan Caldwell remained stuck in his old ways, Darnell knew that the art world had already passed him by. Darnell's art was not a passing trend, it was a lasting legacy in the making. Darnell Foster's name became synonymous with innovation, social relevance, and cultural storytelling. As his reputation spread, the invitations to exhibit his work flooded in from some of the world's most prestigious museums and galleries. From the Guggenheim in New York to the Tate Modern in London, Darnell's art was showcased in spaces once reserved for the most elite artists, signaling a dramatic shift in the art world. His work, now revered for its powerful blend of contemporary techniques and cultural depth, garnered widespread praise. Art critics highlighted his ability to fuse abstraction with profound narratives, his paintings depicting the complexities of race, identity, and history with a contemporary lens. Critics lauded Darnell for bringing new perspectives to the art world, and he became known not just as an artist, but as a leader in the cultural shift towards more inclusive, socially conscious art. As his art gained recognition, Darnell's paintings began selling for millions at auction. He was no longer just an artist, the work had become a symbol of change, of voices that were once marginalized now being celebrated. Collectors lined up to purchase his pieces, which were now seen as invaluable, both for their aesthetic qualities and their historical and social significance. Darnell had transcended the confines of the traditional art world and had become a cultural icon, reshaping the future of contemporary art with every brushstroke. Darnell's influence extended beyond the art market, and he soon became a leading voice in discussions about art's role in social change. He was invited to speak at forums and conferences, to contribute to discussions about race, identity, and representation in the arts. His rise in prominence made him a thought leader, and his work began to influence a new generation of artists and curators who saw in him a model for success. Jonathan Caldwell's realization. Jonathan Caldwell, still reeling from his rejection of Darnell's work years earlier, began to notice the growing buzz surrounding the artist. His art was everywhere, featured in top galleries, discussed by critics, and celebrated by collectors. Jonathan couldn't ignore the fact that Darnell's success was not just a fleeting moment, but a cultural movement in the making. As Jonathan sat in his office, flipping through an art magazine, he saw Darnell's name again, this time next to some of the most prominent figures in the art world. The realization hit him hard, he had missed out on an extraordinary talent. He had rejected Darnell when the artist was just starting out, dismissing his work as unpolished and too raw. Now, Jonathan could see the depth and value of what he had so carelessly overlooked. As his own gallery continued to struggle, Jonathan felt a deep sense of regret. The art world was changing, and Caldwell Gallery was struggling to stay relevant. The types of artists Jonathan had built his reputation on, those who adhered to traditional standards, were losing their place in the shifting landscape of the art market. Darnell, who had once been dismissed as a passing fad, was now leading the charge for a more diverse and inclusive art world. Jonathan's failure to recognize Darnell's potential haunted him. The world had moved on, and he had been left behind. Darnell's success seemed to grow by the day, and Jonathan could do little but watch as his gallery continued to lose influence. The very artist he had rejected had become a cultural leader, and now Jonathan was witnessing firsthand the consequences of his short-sightedness. Darnell's new identity. With his newfound success, Darnell took full control of his career. No longer reliant on traditional galleries like Caldwell's, he began to negotiate directly with top collectors, curators, and museums. Darnell's business acumen matched his artistic talent. He built a team of trusted advisors who helped him navigate the complexities of the art world, ensuring that he was always in control of his own destiny. But Darnell's rise wasn't just about personal fame or wealth. He saw his success as an opportunity to change the art world, to ensure that future generations of marginalized artists had the same opportunities he had fought so hard to attain. Darnell created mentorship programs for young artists, offering them the same opportunities that had once been denied to him. Through these programs, Darnell helped elevate other artists from underrepresented communities, providing them with the resources, exhibitions, and exposure they needed to succeed. Darnell's rise was not just about his own career, it was about reshaping the art world into a space that was more inclusive, more diverse, and more reflective of the world at large. He used his influence to challenge the traditional structures that had long dominated the industry, pushing for a greater representation of artists from all backgrounds. His gallery exhibitions showcased a wider range of perspectives, highlighting the importance of social commentary and cultural representation in contemporary art. Darnell's commitment to elevating others ensured that his influence would extend beyond his own career. The artists he mentored would go on to shape the future of the art world, and his legacy would be defined by the doors he opened for others to walk through. Darnell's identity as an artist had evolved. He was no longer just someone creating art, he had become a symbol of change, of resistance, and of the power of art to transform society. With his newfound wealth and influence, Darnell Foster decided to take control of Caldwell Gallery in a way that would reshape the institution forever. Quietly, he began purchasing shares in the gallery, leveraging his success and connections to slowly gain influence within the organization. As the gallery faced increasing financial struggles, Darnell's shares became more valuable, and his involvement with the gallery deepened. Darnell knew that to truly change the art world, he had to start from within. As Caldwell Gallery continued to lose relevance, unable to adapt to the changing tides of the art market, Darnell used his position to push for a transformation. He began advocating for a more inclusive representation of artists, pushing for the inclusion of emerging voices, particularly those from marginalized communities. Darnell's vision for the gallery was one of inclusivity, diversity, and social relevance. He pushed for the gallery to showcase artists who had been ignored by the traditional art world, artists whose work didn't fit the narrow, elitist model Jonathan had championed. Gradually, Darnell's influence grew. He began reshaping the gallery's exhibitions, ensuring that they reflected his belief that art should be a mirror of society, one that amplifies diverse voices and addresses real-world issues. Darnell had always believed that art was a tool for social change, and now, as a key player in the gallery, he was finally able to align it with his values. The gallery began to showcase artists who were once rejected by the traditional art world, highlighting their talent and social relevance. By restructuring the gallery in line with his own vision, Darnell effectively transformed it into an institution that challenged the old guard of the art world. His move was not just about gaining power, it was about creating a space for artists who had been pushed to the margins, giving them a platform to be heard. Jonathan Caldwell's downfall. Jonathan Caldwell, meanwhile, found himself powerless to stop the changes taking place within his own institution. His refusal to adapt to the evolving art world left him in a position where the very values that had once defined Caldwell Gallery were now its biggest liabilities. While Darnell's influence grew, Jonathan's outdated elitist model was increasingly irrelevant. The wealthy collectors who had once flocked to his gallery were now interested in the diverse and socially conscious art that Darnell was championing. Jonathan tried to hold on, but as Darnell's success continued to soar, it became increasingly clear that the world was moving on without him. The gallery that Jonathan had worked so hard to build was now a symbol of the old guard's inability to keep up with the changing times. Darnell's rise to prominence eclipsed Jonathan's own career, and the gallery that Jonathan had once controlled was slipping from his grasp. Jonathan's desperation grew as he watched Darnell's meteoric rise, unable to prevent the gallery's decline. His refusal to adapt and his dismissive attitude towards new voices in the art world had caused his downfall. Jonathan now understood that his failure to recognize Darnell's potential had led to the irreversible decline of his legacy. Darnell had not only taken control of the gallery, he had effectively dismantled the elitist model that Jonathan had once fought to preserve. The final confrontation. The inevitable confrontation came when Darnell, now the majority shareholder and the new driving force behind the gallery, called Jonathan to a meeting. Jonathan entered the room, still unaware of the extent of Darnell's involvement in the gallery's restructuring. He had clung to the illusion that he still held some power within the institution, but when Darnell revealed the truth, it was clear that the tables had turned. "Jonathan," Darnell began, his voice calm but firm, "I now hold a majority stake in Caldwell Gallery. I'm taking control of this institution." Jonathan's face drained of color as the realization hit him. The gallery that he had spent his entire career building was no longer his. Darnell's quiet, calculated moves had completely shifted the balance of power, and now he was in charge. "I've watched your gallery struggle," Darnell continued. "For years, you've kept the same exclusive, elitist model, ignoring the power of art that reflects society's true diversity. It's time for change, Jonathan. The world is different now, and art needs to reflect that. My vision for the gallery is one that values diversity, inclusivity, and the voices of those who have been left out for too long." Jonathan, stunned and humiliated, tried to protest. I didn't realize. I thought it was just a trend, a passing phase. I didn't understand the impact your work would have." Darnell's gaze never wavered. "It was never about your validation, Jonathan. My success wasn't about proving you wrong, it was about reshaping the art world, about making sure that the stories of people like me were heard. I'm here to make a difference, and this gallery is going to reflect that new reality." Darnell paused for a moment before offering Jonathan a token of concession. "I'm offering you a position in the new gallery structure, Jonathan, but it's clear now that my influence will guide this gallery's future." Jonathan, finally realizing the gravity of the situation, nodded reluctantly. He understood now that Darnell's vision had won, that the art world had moved on without him. Darnell's leadership had secured a new direction for Caldwell Gallery, and Jonathan's days as the owner had come to an end. Under Darnell Foster's leadership, Caldwell Gallery underwent a radical transformation. Once an exclusive institution that catered to the tastes of the elite, the gallery became a dynamic space where emerging artists from diverse backgrounds were given the opportunity to showcase their work. Darnell's vision for the gallery was clear: it should be a space that fostered creativity, cultural dialogue, and artistic experimentation. No longer confined to the traditional art world's narrow standards, Caldwell Gallery became a platform for the voices that had long been overlooked. Darnell's commitment to diversity was evident in every exhibit the gallery hosted. Artists whose work was once considered unpolished or too raw were now celebrated for their unique perspectives. The gallery became known for its inclusive approach, prioritizing works that spoke to the lived experiences of marginalized communities. From painters to sculptors to multimedia artists, Caldwell Gallery showcased a wide range of voices, all united by their desire to challenge the status quo. In addition to transforming the gallery's exhibitions, Darnell launched mentorship programs aimed at providing opportunities for young artists who had been denied access to traditional galleries. These programs helped cultivate the next generation of artists, offering them not only exposure but also the guidance and resources needed to succeed in a competitive and often exclusionary industry. Darnell knew firsthand how difficult it could be for emerging artists from underrepresented communities to break through. His mentorship initiatives provided a lifeline for these artists, ensuring that they would have the tools to thrive in an art world that was beginning to change. Under Darnell's stewardship, Caldwell Gallery became a pioneering institution, leading the charge for a more inclusive and socially conscious art world. The gallery was no longer just a place to view art, it had become a space for cultural exchange, education, and activism. The new direction that Darnell had set was transforming not only the gallery itself, but also the art world at large. Reflection on the journey. As Darnell stood in the heart of the gallery, surrounded by the work of young artists from all walks of life, he reflected on his own journey. He had come a long way from the struggling artist working out of a cramped studio, rejected by the very galleries that now sought his guidance. His journey had been filled with obstacles, from financial hardship to societal rejection, but each challenge had shaped him into the artist and leader he had become. Looking back, Darnell realized that his success had never been just about personal achievement, it had always been about paving the way for others. He had fought not only for his own place in the art world but for the opportunity for others to succeed as well. His rise wasn't just a victory for him, it was a victory for every artist who had been told their work wasn't good enough, for every voice that had been silenced or ignored. Darnell's story was a testament to resilience, vision, and the power of perseverance. His success proved that anyone, regardless of their background or the obstacles they faced, could break through barriers and achieve greatness. Darnell had defied the expectations placed on him, and in doing so, he had created a new path for others to follow. He had shown the art world that true value in art wasn't determined by a narrow, elitist standard, it was determined by the message it carried and the impact it had on the world. His rise also proved the power of art to challenge societal norms and transform society. Through his work, Darnell had raised questions, sparked conversations, and illuminated the experiences of people who had long been overlooked. Art, Darnell believed, could be a tool for social change, and he had used it to challenge the very structures that had tried to suppress him. Darnell's lasting impact. Darnell's legacy extended far beyond the paintings he created. It was defined by the lasting changes he had made in the art world, particularly through his mentorship programs and his transformation of Caldwell Gallery. His work had opened doors for countless artists who had been denied access to the industry's most prestigious spaces. These artists, many of whom had been marginalized or overlooked, now had a place in the art world thanks to Darnell's advocacy. His gallery had become a hub for creativity, self-expression, and cultural change, and it continued to inspire future generations of artists. Darnell's work and mentorship would live on through the artists he helped and the impact he had on the art world. His story served as a reminder that art, like society, could be transformed when people challenged the status quo and fought for what they believed in. Darnell had shown the world that success was not just about fame or wealth, it was about using one's platform to make a difference. His legacy was a beacon for future generations of artists who, like him, would challenge conventions, break barriers, and create their own paths. Through his leadership, Caldwell Gallery became a symbol of hope and change, a place where artists could be celebrated for who they were and the stories they had to tell. In the end, Darnell's story was more than just that of an artist. It was the story of someone who had not only achieved his dreams, but had helped others achieve theirs. His journey had proven that with resilience, vision, and a refusal to be silenced, anything was possible.